everyone. I give you another warm welcome to Life Stories Worldwide. We have another life story coming live to you today, and we want you to share this with your friends. Tell people about this story that's going out today. It's going live on StreamYard, Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube. Life Stories brings you stories from all over the world. People who've gone through all types of trials and tests, and how they've come through and lives have been transformed. You can watch these stories over and over again on our YouTube channel, Life Stories Worldwide. And we'll encourage you to subscribe to this channel and encourage others to subscribe as well. If you want to listen to these, you can also listen to them on Spotify. You go to Spotify and look for Life Stories Worldwide Radio. You can listen to these stories while you're walking or while driving your car. Today, we have a story coming to you from Southport in the United Kingdom. John Fairhurst is going to share his story. When John was 12 years old, he had an ambition to be a jockey. He had his own ponies, and that helped him to learn about horses and grooming. But there was an incident later where he had a near-death experience and his life was completely changed. So I'm going to hand over to John now to tell you his story. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Alan, and welcome everyone to the channel. My name's John Fairhurst. I was born in 1953 near Wigan in Lancashire, and I was delivered by caesarean section. So I think the Lord had his hand on me at an early stage, and shortly after being born, I got double pneumonia. So the minister was called in to pray for me and baptized me. So I survived that. So that was good. I'm proud of my mother and father with the war effort and what they went through in the war. My dad was a soldier before the war. He must have joined up in about 1934, 35. And he was stationed in India when the war broke out, and spent most of the time fighting on the desert, and then had to surrender at Tobruk, and spent quite a lot of time in concentration camps, sadly, where he managed to survive, where unfortunately a lot of his friends didn't. So I'm really grateful for my dad for what he did in the war effort, and my mother, she lived in London throughout all the Blitz, and she slept in the underground when the bombing was on, and death was around the next corner, it seemed. And in one case, she swapped a shift with a friend of hers whose boyfriend was on leave, and that very night the place got bombed and her friend lost her life. And so isn't it marvelous sometimes how these things happen, you know? And it wasn't my mother there, but a friend. Unfortunately, my mother and father separated back in the early 60s. And so after that, life became somewhat of hardship, because we was once a nice knit family, and then through this we was just all broken apart, and it was sad to say and sad to see and sad to go through as a young boy. My early recollections of Christianity was really in junior school, when we used to go across to the road to St. Thomas's Church in Upholland. It's a beautiful 13th century church, beautiful stained glass windows, and we'd go over Easter and Christmas, and I'd watch and wonder at these people who were so holy, and I thought, wow, there's no way I could ever be a Christian. I'm too bad, I'm too naughty. But I decided to join the choir. Hopefully that might perhaps increase my stature before God, thinking that if I'm a choir boy, I might be good. But I found out that the choir boys wasn't good at all. It was probably worse than me in many ways, and so I was quite disillusioned and left. I guess again my first real steps was by the hand of my sister Sandra, and back in the early 60s, my sister Sandra and Linda was visiting Southport, and they travelled to Southport to buy a little transistor radio, if you remember those little transistor radios. But while he was in Southport, someone gave Sandra a gospel track. Linda really didn't want to know, but Sandra did. So she took the gospel track and took it home and put it on a shelf at home. And when she was trying to tune in the radio to get Radio Luxembourg and Caroline, which was quite popular pop stations at the time, she kept getting Billy Graham and other Christian messages. So she'd listen to Billy Graham a little bit, then she'd go and pick the gospel track up and think, "Oh right, this is sounds the same here." And one of her friends had given her life to Christ, and a friend had become a Christian. So with the gospel from the gospel tract and Billy Graham's message, Sandra became a Christian. It was a catalyst. It was the start of her Christian journey. And so Sandra began to grow and as a Christian and influenced my life a little bit, because she would ask me to go with her to church, and I'd go to church and sometimes to Sunday school. And at one stage, when the gospel message was preached, and I felt convicted of my sin, though I was only quite young, I raised my hand, and the minister asked those who raised the hand to come to the front. And so I went to the front, and he laid hands on me and prayed for me. And as he prayed, I felt this burden lift, and all the sin just seemed to disappear.
Life Stories Worldwide is on YouTube, and it's very easy to subscribe to our channel. Just click the bell and subscribe, and receive notifications of when we are live, or simply watch any of our other videos. So check it out and give us a visit.
So here I was, a young boy, being touched by God. And so I began to grow a little bit as a Christian, but not for very long, because my mother and father had split up. Sandra had left home. The church was about 4 miles away or so, and I had no Christian friends. So unfortunately, I was soon back into the world and going about my own worldly life, as it were, the things that I wanted to do. When I was about 12, I had an ambition. Well, perhaps before that, because I loved horses and I used to go horse riding, and I wanted my own horse or pony. And so I asked my dad if he would buy me a pony, but he said he'd buy it for me, but I had to keep it. I think I really should have said the other way around. I should have said, I'll buy it and you keep it. So this meant that I'd need to get a job to keep the pony. So we lived I'd gone to live with my mother then at the time, and we lived in Coppell at Banktop Cottages near the main London to Glasgow railway line. But just over the bridge, there was a small holding, and it was a garage that used to be a farm. And the man who was running the garage said to me, "Look, you come and help me in the garage when you finish school and at weekends, and you can keep your pony here for nothing. You can use the field and you can use the stables." And that was fantastic. But I also had another passion, and that was motorbikes. And from an early age, I had motorcycles, and so this was great because it meant I could keep my pony and ride it around, and also use the field to ride my motorcycle. So that was a real blessing. And as I worked in the garage as a young man, a young boy really, from about the age of 12, I learned how to mechanic, how to fix cars, how to weld, how to paint, to spray cars. And so before I actually started work, and before I left school, I was sick of work, strangely enough. So that was something else. But my ambition to be a jockey was paramount. I just lived and slept horses, and mother at one stage said I should have been a horse, but there you go. So with this ambition, I managed to get an interview with the top racing trainer of that time, which was Peter Walwyn in Lambourne in Berkshire. So I went down to Peter Walwyn to have the interview, and it was right out in the middle of nowhere in Lambourne, right out into the countryside. And it was pretty hard to get there. And I'd travelled all the way from Lancashire all by myself, this young lad, what I'd probably be just coming up to 15 at the time. So Peter Walwyn, he put me on the scales and he weighed me, and I was 6 stone 10 at the time. And but Peter Walwyn wanted his apprentice jockeys to be 6 stone 6, so I was 4 pounds overweight. But because I'd gone all that way, he was a kind man and started to phone around different racing yards and managed to get me in at F. Maxwell's in Lambourne. So I went to work for F. Maxwell and signed an apprenticeship with him. But after about a year, a couple of things happened which really shook me. One was one of the owners had asked me to ride a horse in a race at Salisbury, but Maxwell had put one of his relatives on, who was basically just an amateur jockey. So I was upset about that. Here's me, apprentice jockey, working to become a jockey, and Maxwell's putting his relatives on. So I was rather upset about that. And secondly, the travelling head lad, who was a great guy, and in his younger days, he was quite a good jockey himself. He took me to one side in the saddlery after most of the work was done in the early afternoon. And he said to me, "John, I'm going to tell you something, but don't say anything to anybody else because you could get me in trouble here." And he said, "You've got a great style as a jockey. You give it 100% and you're totally committed. But I want to tell you, Maxwell is just keeping you because of cheap labour. He just wants to use you." So having heard this, I decided to go and have a word with the trainer, Mr. Maxwell, and asked him if he would promise me some rides next season. But he refused. And so I said, "Well, what's the point of me staying as an apprentice? If you're not going to give me any rides, you're not going to promise me any rides, it's pointless me staying. So I'm going to leave out." And so I gave him a week's notice. And this was like a bombshell, really. This was really destroying all my dreams, everything I'd worked for. My whole ambition was to be a jockey. And unfortunately, this seemed to be the end of the road. So having returned home, I worked in the garage that I'd left, and obviously used the skills that I got as a mechanic and welder, etc. But I still wanted to be a jockey. And so I would look in the horse and hounds and look for jobs to get back into racing, knowing that I'd walked out of my apprenticeship and I would probably be blacklisted, and so I wouldn't be able to get back into racing. But I phoned a racing yard down in Kidderminster, F. Yardley, and he said, "Oh, we'll sort that out for you. Don't worry about your apprenticeship. Come and work for us. Everything will be all right."
If you would like to speak to us here at Life Stories Worldwide Radio, you can simply by dialing +44 7943 550287. Call us now.
Here again, though I was working as a travelling head lad and training to be a jockey and working all hours, yet I seemed to fall into this trap where, again, it was just cheap labour. And where was this going to take me? I didn't see this at first, but this trainer was totally corrupt. And so I decided, well, you know, what's the point here? You know, God must have had a purpose in this, though I didn't see it at the time. It was about 1972, and I would, with other jockeys and stable lads, go out for a drink, and we'd go out, get in a car and go out drinking for the night. And it was here that on the way home one night, we nearly had this accident and nearly crashed into this car. Pardon me. And I thought, if I'd have died then, what would have happened? Where would my soul have gone? Pardon me. And I could hear, as it were, my sister's voice in my head saying, "John, you need to get right with God. The life you're living isn't right." So here again, returning from this drink session, I thought about what nearly had happened of me getting killed. And I began to get really convicted of my sin. So I got on my knees and I said, "Lord, if you're real, I want to come home. Come into my life." And as I prayed that prayer and really meant it, it was just as though God just dropped like a cleansing agent right through my body. And the burdens just lifted. My eyes was opened. The hatred I had in my heart was just turned into love. And I knew that something had happened in my life and I'd been born again. And so much so that I used to smoke from the age of 15. I could never give up smoking. No matter how much I tried, I just could not give up smoking. And so when I got up from my knees, I picked up my cigarettes and I just threw them to the back of the cupboard. And that was it. And thought, wow. And I tried for years to give up smoking. And I was just delivered. Excuse me a minute. Well, I began to witness to everybody that something had happened in my life. I'd been changed. And all that week, my friends, they came and knocked at my door, these other stable lads. Each night, they wouldn't leave me alone. And but I said, no. I'm good. I'm changed. You know, God's come into my life. I really don't want to go out and drink. But that week they were just persistent. But I just held my ground. Anyway, I thought to myself, pardon me, here I am in the middle of nowhere. The Lord's come into my life. Where do I go from here? I don't know any churches. I don't know any Christians. So there, I got on my knees again and I said to the Lord, basically, where do I go from here, Lord? I don't know any churches. I don't know any Christians. And as I prayed that prayer, just these two gate posts came into my head, just like two concrete gate posts and a map. It just seemed to drop into my head, like God was putting some GPS in my head. Well, the next day we was racing at Worcester, so I couldn't go. But after that, I followed this map in my head, which led me down into Kidderminster, just like following a GPS. And I found these gate posts exactly as I saw them. And there in the background was this evangelical church, which I thought, wow. Well, on the Sunday, I walked into the church. Pardon me. They must have thought, look what the cat's dragged in, because I was as rough as a bean. But the Lord had touched my life here. And thank the Lord that the minister's son came and sat with me. And that was a real blessing to be befriended in that sense. And I began to grow as a Christian and seek the baptism in the Holy Spirit. Though I didn't know much about it at the time yet, it was talked about. And when I went to the meeting, I would hear people who was filled with the Spirit and speaking in tongues. But I was still a very young Christian, and this was the early stages of my Christian walk. It just so happened that as I began to witness to people and tell them about the Lord, I also spoke to the trainer and his wife and anybody else. And he wasn't too happy about this. So he started to send me out all by myself, which you don't really do in horse racing, because you might fall off and hurt yourself. So if there's somebody else there, they can get help. And also the horses are worth quite a lot of money. And so if the horse would get loose, if you fell off, someone would go and catch it, as it were, before it would get injured or run under a car or something like that. So the trainer started to send me out by myself. Now, I was right upset about this. I thought, here I am. I've become a Christian, and now I'm being rejected, and I was so upset. But anyway, there I was on the racehorse, going out all by myself, out in the middle of nowhere. Anyway, I was just praising the Lord, going along this bridle track at the end of this field. You know how jockeys ride with the knees up.
Lifestories Worldwide is broadcast live every Monday night at 8 p.m. UK time. We broadcast on YouTube, Facebook and StreamYard. Why not join us every Monday night at 8 p.m. UK time for Lifestories Worldwide.